Okay, everyone, video about tasks 1 through 6 final comps review, which is your next submission. We'll talk a little bit about task 7 as well. I'm going to show you some examples of images because that's what task 7 is all about, incorporating images into your composition. And those images can be photographs that you've taken. They can be photographs that you've found. They can be illustrations. The main thing you want to consider when you start to incorporate imagery is, why use the image? How does it relate to Magma Manchester? What about it connects to the content and what this place is about, and also what engages the viewer or draws them in, considering who the audience is, right? So that's one thing you'll be thinking about for incorporating imagery into task 7. But before that, so what you're submitting, your next due date here is 1 through 6 final comps review. As we've said, the end goal is to have 7 final layouts, all unique from each other. They've all been, you make the comps, you get feedback, you refine. They've all been refined to basically, dialed in, detailed final layouts. So what you're doing in this task 6 final comps review is taking all of the tasks that you've done for task 1 through 6 and deciding, okay, which one is the best of each, okay? And so you're going to submit 1 for each task, 1 through 6, in this final comps review. So you will have 6 pages basically in your PDF, 1 for task 1, 1 for task 2, 1 for task 3, etc. Okay, and then once you get those done, I'll review those, and then you're going to submit task 7 on the 29th, and on the next due date, I should say, and then the end goal is to have everything submitted for the final submissions, which you will put actually in the project to information hierarchy main project overview. Okay, that's where the final 7 will be submitted. Okay, we're doing this a little differently because it's all online. Typically, this would have been printed and put in a book and all of this. So we're working in a modified context here. Okay, so any questions about task 1 through 6 submissions, let me know, and we'll go from there. So let's talk a little bit about images in task 7. Okay, just some quick examples here. We'll try to keep this a little shorter than usual. Here's just a few examples of imagery incorporated into compositions with the rest of the content. Okay, again, don't get hung up on Magma Covent Garden. That's a different location. But essentially, here's an image which it's not a straight up photograph. It's not anything directly representational of a particular topic. It's an element that's connected to one of the content components here, which is basically design. If you're working with printed matter, you're dealing with packaging, design, etc. Oftentimes you'll see these print. These are all like print cues for a press situation. So if a job is going to print, you do these proofs and these what are called make-readies, and these elements are ways to test the color, the density of color, and any kind of screens and tints that are happening. You'll get these little snippets of information. So this is just a little found object in a print situation, cut up and scanned and put in here as a sort of nod to graphic design. And then this element here, this black element, is simply roughly drawn in with the pen tool. You can do it in Illustrator or in InDesign, just for a contrast point to this image, which is all this, this interesting color, and then also a place for this type to sit on and create some distinction between here and here. The stuff, the content here and the content here. Okay, so again, even though you have different sections, you have different weights. The sizes and line spacing values are generally the same. You have, obviously this is the main read. That's the second read. So first, second, and then third here in terms of hierarchy. So you'll have a little bit of variation in size there, but still a sense of unity. And everything is centrally located and connected to each other, not spread all throughout the page. Okay, that's just one. So one way you can use images, bringing in a little snippet of something that's textural or decorative that connects in some way to the content. Okay, very different than something like this, which is a full-on photograph, which is incorporated into the whole background, and really connects to the idea of design, architecture, maybe even interior design implied. So this also connects to photography, obviously. So again, just a cool black and white image as the main visual element, and then the rest of the content just works around that. So again, one thing I keep repeating is that in your compositions, if you have a core central component, which is really the driving element in the layout, the rest of the content lives around that in support of that main thing. Okay, so with the image, you don't have to go really crazy with the content. You can still have room for tweaking the Magma logo here, or the Magma title, we'll say. Or you could go really large with that as well, and it could still work fine. But the central image, or central element, is this image, and then the rest of the content works around that. Could this have been moved over here somewhere instead and made it, it could make it feel even more unified? Possibly so. But just one example. Another one here, a straight photo of the storefront. Okay, not the most earth-shattering conceptually by any means. But here they've handled it in a good way. The first thing they've done, and this is really important, is that they've found an image, okay, that is not so low res that it would be pixelated. Because that's one thing you cannot have, guys. You can't have any photos that are so low resolution, especially if you blow them up to fit the whole page. When they start to lose quality and start to lose resolution, we don't want that. We don't want any pixelated imagery. Okay, so your images need to be tight and sharp. So you can see in here, this image is looking tight and sharp. All right. So if you find something in a photo, for example, online that is 72 dpi and it's only 3 inches by 3 inches, when you blow that up to make it fit on the page, it's going to look like a checkerboard almost. It's going to be so pixelated. Okay. If you find an image that's 20 by 20 and it's 72 dpi, well then you can go into Photoshop and scale that down to 8 by 8 and let it, because it's so large, there's so much pixel information. When you scale that really large image down, even though it's a low resolution, it'll still be sharp at a smaller size. You just can't go in the opposite direction. Okay, so that's just something to be aware of. And the main reason I show this here is, again, actually a tasteful application of a gradient to the image, so that adds some nice depth and makes the image a little more interesting, which in and of itself, like I said, is pretty straightforward. And then they just adhere to a very simple grid structure with the rest of the information. They didn't even bring in Magma Manchester, or in this case Covent Garden. They put it down here, but as the main title, they used the logo type on the building exterior. Okay, so straightforward, but a good use of a straightforward image by how they've manipulated it. Here's someone, you could argue that this connects to the content because illustration is one of their things, and they're appealing to designers, architects, hopefully, but also illustrators. And so this person decided to use the type to illustrate this image here. And I guess for a certain subset of the Magma audience, this would be something that could be compelling and engage them. So using type to create this skull element here. And again, in a really creative way, the way that the color was applied to all these different elements, you see all this overlap of type. Everything is essentially type here. Okay, there's nothing brought in that's a photo or an illustration. Essentially, it's an illustration created from the type, which is not a requirement, but it's just kind of a cool, cool approach. And intentionally tight type, and you can see the different side, the caps here, books, worshipped, volatile. Okay, it kind of connects to the image, so there's a lot of thought there that's not just thrown up there and sort of randomly placed. Okay, every detail in a good situation where the composition is nicely done, all those little things are considered. What am I emphasizing? How does that relate to what I'm showing here? Who's the audience and what do they want to see? And then a really nice example of this black type, this reversed out of this these colors here, just that black type on top of there, seamlessly fits with the rest of the content. So nicely done. Way opposite of that, totally minimal, where again this block is basically formatted, very roughly or not very roughly, but it's not really hasn't been broken up and detailed in any way beyond line spacing and size and those types of things. And this person just called out the idea of film. Okay, so they took one. This could be something that you would see maybe in a campaign for Magma, where they would have, in every issue of a magazine, or they do little weekly posters or weekly video, or I'm sorry, online posts or something, and each one connects to the specific topic. So they might have one for photo, might have one for graphic design. This one's for film, playing on that idea of the classic sort of 60s era, or 50s era even, like Hitchcock films. This sort of the eyes, the mysterious eyes, and then those overlaying colors are almost like gels that would be placed for different lighting purposes and lighting for film. So just, a totally different approach. But again, not a big full photograph this time, just an element taken, sliced, cropped, and used in a way that fits to their concept. Again, concept drove the idea or the composition here. And some of these are more, just design oriented. I mean, this isn't necessarily conceptual. Again, it's taking an exterior shot of the store, but it's the way they've treated that image by creating, all these little boxes here, and which make that one image. It looks like it's one continuous image. It is one continuous image, but they've if you were to open up this file and look at it, this would be that the image would be repeated in here multiple times. And just in order to do that, you have to create these little separate boxes here. You can create any shape box you want to bring an image into. Same, in Illustrator or in InDesign. You can fit it, an image into any container, and we'll talk about that. So they've done that here in just an interesting way of overlapping this, the topics. They create a sense of depth. They float a little bit in the layout, which is really cool, and they engage the viewer in a way that this pulls me in because there's some interesting play. I mean, there's little added elements here. They're just graphic components that help to, those little textural elements bring it alive a little more. You don't want to just put stuff in to put stuff in. Usually you want to think about what do I need to have in here, and what do I need to take out of here? Okay, so how do you say the most with the least is a good thing to think about. In this case, those little additions add some graphic interest and a little bit of balance to the other more angled, sort of rectilinear shapes. Those circles add a nice counter to that, which is cool. Okay, another architectural element here, a building shot. This is someone who shot this photo themselves and then turned it upside down, So how can you flip your imagery? I'm a big fan of that. Taking an image and making it, orienting it sideways. How does it change the way I see it? Or how does it change how it works in whatever context is happening? And then they've overlaid the title really large, and the rest of the information is just, boom, sitting down there, very simply and very much in support of this main section up here, okay? Title, URL, and then the rest of the stuff there, okay? Same person, same approach, okay? But it's nice to see some versions, same layout, but they've incorporated a couple different images, and they do another one here as well. Okay, so again, same layout, different image. How does it totally change the feel of the content, okay, and the feel of the composition? So one thing that's important too is you don't want to take an image and just stick it in the middle of the page and just have it sit there like a snapshot or something. Thinking about incorporating a large scale image, and look at this, it bleeds off all four sides. It's cropped to just one eye. You can see this whole person, you could see this whole face, but something about just cropping directly in, especially for this type of layout, having the whole face in here is very different than just having this really large crop of the left side of the person's face. Okay, it adds a little more mystery, a little more intrigue, and is just graphically far more interesting, especially the way the negative space here happens with the hair falling down and the black behind the the face there. Really, simple, but cropping and enlarging as much as you can. Again, your image has to be high enough resolution. It has to be a big enough image to be able to do that. Doing that is a thing to consider, okay? And on that note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this PDF. I won't get into it all now, but this PDF is something you're going to want to review. It talks a little bit about using imagery. Here's an example of, this is specifically talking about editorial or magazine layouts. Here's two approaches to the same title page of an article, for example. You could make it look like this, or you could make it look like this. Okay, far more visually compelling and graphically interesting here. Okay. Going life size and larger than life, bleeding, again, like we saw in that last phase, bleeding off the side of the page. In this case, it's a spread, so it's a little bit different. But even if you were to use a single page, how big can you go to make it fit in the space in a way that's going to engage the viewer more visually? Okay. Same thing with stuff here we talked about. So here's a full image. Okay. This whole photograph might be interesting as a snapshot, but when you take just the core components there and crop in, tight on them, the image gets far more interesting. Okay, so there's just some really good information in here. So orienting your image, so which one is most visually compelling? This one where it sits directly in the center, or this one where there's shifted down a little bit? With this one where you shift it up a little bit? Think about that placement so it's not just automatically stuck in the center. Okay, like again, just same thing is true for center type. Just stuck in the middle, centered, it's not the most dynamic layout. Okay? There's a time and a place for it, but I don't know that this one's it, considering the content that we're dealing with, which is a more art design, more sophisticated consideration. Okay? So I'll post this for you. I mean, again, the idea is that going large, using scale differences, cropping, going really large on your images is an important thing. So these aren't directly connected to what we're doing here, so I'm going to move on from those. So that's kind of the thing to consider when using imagery. If you're looking at some examples here, here's just a quick overview on how to use imagery, aside from what we just looked at in those examples. Here's one photo, okay, that was taken at a museum, okay, and you can use this photo in a lot of different ways, okay. You can put it here in the background, okay, as an element here, in a very, very simple layout, okay. This is obviously super basic, but illustrating the point here, you have an image that is placed in a box here, okay, and to bring an image in, you're just going to use your rectangle frame tool, okay, and you're going to draw that rectangle frame, and then you're going to go to Command D, okay, which is File, Place, and you're going to go to whatever image you want. Let me just pick an image here. Actually, let's go to this. We'll just throw whatever in here. Look at that one. Okay, and that's how you do it. Okay, so and then if you want to move your image around, the whole thing, you use your black arrow. If you want to move just the image on the inside of that, you can use your white arrow and move it around. Okay, so that's just you can look at adding images in InDesign. I'm sure there are many tutorials. If you wanted to create a different type of shape, you could simply use your pen tool and create whatever shape you wanted. Actually, put that. Go to Command D. Okay, and it'll place the image in that shape that you just made. Okay, so pretty straightforward, but potentially, a lot of interesting things you can do. So as you can see in this image here, there's just an overlay on top of the photo, which is a separate overlay, and it's just a black with the, if you look at the effects, there's the multiply is put on there so you can see through it. Okay, you can also play with the opacity then and lighten it up or darken it up depending on whatever you want to do. Okay. You could go, so it's really barely noticeable. You can play with your blending modes here and see what do they look like. Obviously, that doesn't look like much. And sometimes they'll be really subtle, so you just got to be aware of that. The other thing you could do is instead of adding a color overlay, if you wanted to, you have your image here. You could go into your swatches and add a color to that image. Okay, if you wanted to. It's a little bit different. You're still gonna see some of the tones within the image, and the color is gonna come in a way that's not just like a clear overlay. So you have to do this and experiment with it and see what works well for your needs. Okay, so how you apply that is up to you. You can add color directly to the box, or you can overlay the color. And so, like for example here, if I do this, and let's make this yellow as an example. You can see when I've applied yellow directly to the image, versus I'm going to put no color on here now, and then I'm going to put this here, this overlay. Okay, and I'm going to make that yellow. Okay, is it that different? You know what I mean? Like, let's check this out. It's a little more vibrant when you overlay it versus, directly in the image, and the shadowing changes a little bit. It's just a little darker, but you can alter that as much as you want, okay? So you can decide, is it best to add the overlay or go with your color directly into your image, okay? And how you apply your colors is totally up to you, depending on your image. The other thing you can do is, you can take an image like this, and this is like I was telling you on that one layout where the student had the same image of the storefront but cut up. This is that same image, just placed, taking the figures out and just using the shadows, okay? Just using these shadows. And so that's done by, essentially, sorry here, let me, if you look at this image is, again, same one, but it's just that same photo. Now if I go to this square, that's that same photo. It's been sized down a little bit, but the idea was just to get the shadow elements instead of using the figures. But that same image from above is repeated in here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and then moved around according to however works for whatever the composition is. Okay. So again, think about that. You can apply, use the same image in a variety of different ways, depending on your layout here. Now here are the colors added directly to the image frame, okay? So there's no overlay here. So that's one thing to consider. And then you can decide, maybe I want to change colors on one of them and create some emphasis, or add another one here, whatever you want to do. That's totally up to you. You can take that same photo and change the way it looks by, if you look at this, that's the same image, okay? And all that's been done here is some shapes were added on top of that image, drawn on top of that image to create some sort of different feel. That's a, totally different vibe than the image itself, okay? And those are just shapes drawn with the pen tool, and then colors applied with the multiply effect, blending mode, and it just changes it. Again, you can just explore and see what works best for you, okay? That same approach is used here. We looked at this Ellsworth Kelly image before in the previous video, and it's the same image, but again, just these overlays you can see on top here. So what's happening is that this image is a single image, and it's brought in here with this text box frame, image frame, okay, this black and white frame. And all that's been done there is that's been added. This is a similar image, or the same image even, but it's just been cut and separated, and then put together like a little puzzle here. And then these color shapes were placed directly on top, and the color was applied with the effect, the multiply blending mode, to create that color overlay, and then the type works around that. Okay, very straightforward. Okay. Here's the one we looked at earlier. Again, we talked about the fact that it's essentially just an image, a little snippet of a scan, and then this is just a shape drawn. Okay, and the thing here is, once you get things in, one of the things I'm still noticing is just like little bits of details that could still be better. So if you look in this situation, this looks pretty good, but I think that my word spacing could be better. Okay, so don't forget these details, guys. Go in and unify things a little bit more. I'm still seeing type that is too big in many layouts, and we've talked about that. Okay, you got to go smaller in your text type generally, depending on the layout, and you want to make them feel unified. So you're gonna, even if you have different weights, you're gonna have the same sizes of your subtype, the type that's subordinate to the main components. Like we said, here's the main element, here's a secondary component, and then the this type is all the same size and all the same line spacing. Okay, so be thinking about that. You could, decide, okay, if I wanted to, what size is this? This is 20. This is 30. Okay, what happens if that goes to 20? It doesn't feel as good. Okay, so going 10 points difference between here and here, while visually somewhat subtle, you can see once you make it the same size, there is actually a pretty significant difference between the two, which adds to the levels of hierarchy. Okay, so again, how you use the imagery is totally your call. And the type of imagery you use is your call, but again, you want to connect it to here. It's not a random photo. It's not just a snapshot placed in the center of the page. Explore different options. Explore some things that are more abstract and textural. Explore things that are more photographic. How can you treat them? This whole thing could be a background image like we looked at in a couple of the other examples, or you can cut that image up and take two pieces of an image and slice them and put them together in a new way. Okay. So where you take the imagery is totally your call, and you have absolute say as a designer in exploring the beauty of incorporating imagery. And that, again, that can be illustration, that could be photography, it could be original work. You can get it from somewhere else, that's fine. It just has to be high enough resolution to be able to be usable without bitmapping. If you have any questions, look up on YouTube, using images without pixelation, or use how to use high-res imagery, or how to make sure an image is high enough resolution to work in a layout. Okay, and if you need me to, I can make a short video on that as well. So if you have questions, let me know about that specifically, and we'll talk to you soon.